Hello, welcome. You are watching Raw News, and this is Insight, the premier news show here on Raw 12:51 a.m., where we discuss the biggest stories of the week and we let Warwick students have their opinions on everything on and off campus. I'm your host Ian Makungu, head of news here at Raw 12:51 a.m., and I'm here to guide the conversation for all the various topics to discuss today. We're going to talk about the in the massive crisis from last week, where it seemed like the EU was going to impose a hard border in Ireland over the vaccine, pushed by Oxford. What's exactly going on with the EU's vaccine rollout, and what can we learn from that in order to improve our own, which is in all fairness are going very, very well. We're also going to talk about game stocks. You may have seen a situation over in Wall Street where the brick and mortar realtor store GameStop having its stock price raised massively by Reddit in an attempt to sink hedge funds, and we're going to talk about what that means for us. And also democracy. It's all student vote week, so we thought let's have a discussion about what SU democracy feels like for people this year. I don't know they're more engaged in light of everything we've seen over last term. But before we can do any of that, I have to use my wonderful panel, starting with my news deputy, Will. Will, welcome to the stream.
Hello, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, so Will, you've been on the show. How many times have you been on the show so far?
Oh, I think it might have been 2 or 3 so far, but I've done the other shows as well.
Yeah, so you've been on the show 2 or 3 times, and you're already news deputy. I feel like that's probably a faster rise than I had last year, going from being a first year to being head of news. I have to say that's very impressive. So you're a PPE student, right?
Yes, I am.
What's it like studying PPE from home this year?
Oh, so I'm actually back on campus now, but I guess it's still the same thing because you have to stay inside. It's quite different because you do have to switch up your focus quite a lot. So obviously, economics is very different from politics and philosophy, and politics and philosophy are different from one another. So it's like every day I'm bouncing from doing maths and economics to looking at ideologies in politics and then the philosophy of art. So yeah, it's quite a dynamic course.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna bring something. I'm gonna ask Neil. I'm gonna ask you the same question. Welcome to the stream, Neil. Neil, what's it like studying from home this year?
Yeah, like Will said, it's really different, and I think you're a lot less guided by the fact that you don't necessarily have strict deadlines on when you have to sort of do reading by, because everything is so flexible in terms of which seminars you go to, but also how you sort of get to them as well. So there's a lot more free time, and I think it in the long run kind of makes you a bit less productive because you think that you have a lot of time on your hands, and obviously you do, and it kind of reduces the focus on your work, I guess.
Yeah. Well, how have you been using all this new free time then? What have you been getting up to?
Absolutely nothing, unfortunately. Yeah, just probably wasting more time than I would usually do on Twitter and stuff.
I probably can say the same. Someone who can't say the same though is Andrew, who's been working very hard on the engineering SSLC. Andrew, welcome to the stream.
Hello, everyone.
So Andrew, obviously, every time I brought you on, you've been discussing sort of the ongoing changing nature of what Warwick's been doing related to COVID. Any updates for us this week?
Nothing this week. We have a meeting tomorrow, so hopefully next week I'll have something for you.
Well, I'm gonna hold you to that then. I'm gonna hold you to that. Andrew, SU elections are coming up. Not SU elections. All student votes coming up this week. You were voted in yourself, the SSLC. What you want to tell to people at home right now who are thinking maybe not voting the all student vote?
Just do it. It barely takes any time to sign up, and if you want to get your voice, I know it sounds so cliche, but if you want to get your voice heard, you have to vote. There's not really another way around it.
Yeah. And that's from an officially endorsed student union representative. Someone who's very familiar with SE democracy. Charlotte, welcome to the stream. Charlotte, what do you think about this? What do you think about this week's all student vote?
Yeah, I have got somewhat of a vested interest in it, considering I actually submitted a motion, but due to various SU rules and regulations, it will not actually be going to a student vote. But I do encourage people to vote, even if you don't care about the motions. I'd say just abstain on anything, because then that sends a message to the SU. Ultimately, I think that SU democracy is beyond repair, but this is just one of those things where you can have your say, and because it's there, definitely do.
Yeah. Well, we're going to ask you democracy more later on, but first we're going to start with vaccine diplomacy, or perhaps lack of diplomacy is a better word. Last week we saw the EU go through a bit of a crisis as they consider activating Article 16 of the Brexit agreement, which would have imposed a hard border in Ireland in order to stop the exporting of Pfizer doses to the UK and stop AstraZeneca and to encourage AstraZeneca to give them more doses of their vaccine. A vaccine which several members of the EU have now speculated is less effective than previously claimed, against some degree of evidence. Pam, I want to ask, how many of you have were sort of following this when it happened last week? Just show of hands. Also, you guys don't have to be muted. You can just have your mics on. That's perfectly fine. When I want to come to you, what did you think when you first heard the story develop?
I was really quite surprised. I think the EU has done a miraculous thing in making everyone in this country dislike them. Just from like Nigel Farage, who would always dislike the EU, to even like Labour, the DUP, and the SDLP, who were all united against the EU triggering Article 16 of the withdrawal agreement.
And Charlotte, what did you think?
Yeah, it really is. Sorry,
wrong camera.
Wait, so I thought you said Charlotte, not Andy.
Yeah, I know, I did. No, sorry, it's just it.
Okay.
There was a bit of glitch on my end. It went to the wrong camera when I was trying to. Yeah, sorry.
Cool. No, I'm very surprised as well, because it really is the worst thing that the EU could do in terms of optics. And of course, they've got international condemnation from countries within the EU, and you've got the World Health Organization criticising them as well. And I guess like throughout the Brexit negotiations, they always insisted that the last thing that they would let happen was an Irish hard border. But with this, they in theory, if it had gone ahead, they would have been creating in a sense an Irish hard border. So it really is an optics nightmare for the SU. And reading articles and stuff, it seems that various EU insiders have leaked to journalists that they're just unhappy about it as everyone else is. So I really have no idea why the EU thought this would be a good decision to make. And as I said, it's kind of united. Even some of the most fervent Remainers have come behind and said this is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's zoom out on this issue and talk about what caused the problem in the first place. The central dispute seems to be the EU claims that their contract with Pfizer mandates that Pfizer needs to give them a certain number of doses within the first quarter of 2021. I can't remember the exact number. I believe it was something according to 10 million doses. Not Pfizer. Also, it wasn't Pfizer. AstraZeneca. I've got everything wrong in the first sentence here. This is a show's going great so far. The EU's contract mandates that AstraZeneca gives them a certain number of doses in the first quarter of 2021, but AstraZeneca claims that was only a best efforts agreement. The EU claims that since AstraZeneca is giving too many doses to UK, some amount of the doses need to be diverted over to EU, or they would consider putting barriers on importing Pfizer into the UK. Now, obviously, this seemed for most of it to be some contract disputes, but then on Friday, EU released a contract which seemed to back up AstraZeneca's claim. There's too many vaccine companies. I love that we have so many vaccines. I wish they could all just coalesce into one single company. It seemed to back up AstraZeneca's claim that they only made a best efforts agreement, and in response, the EU threatened to put a hard border in between Ireland and Northern Ireland unless they were given more vaccines. Andrew, I want to come to you on this. Obviously, you said you weren't following the story from the start. What do you think? What do you think about this? Should AstraZeneca give the EU more vaccines? I mean, we all are. We're all trying to solve the same crisis and say this is a massive humanitarian issue.
It's very difficult to say, and I don't want to kind of go one way or the other because there's so much like health policy that comes with this that I just haven't. It's like way above my head, and in my opinion, if we've left, like, we should probably be prioritizing here, but there is obviously an argument to be made that there's still people who are like dying because of this. They still need the vaccine, and you can't just say like, oh well, we're here, so we're just going to keep like what we have.
Yeah, Neil, would you agree?
Yeah, I think so as well, and I think it's also probably like other people have said before. It's not necessarily great optics if they're sort of holding these doses of the vaccine hostage, essentially. And I think it's sort of antithetical to repairing any semblance of, UK EU relations in the sort of grander scheme of things as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so that's the the UK central claim here is that they signed a deal with AstraZeneca first, which gave the AstraZeneca time to actually build up the supplies they needed in the UK to get the vaccine out there. EU was later. That's how the queue works. As the EU said, they don't think first come first serve applies. Will, who do you think has a better principle here?
I just think that for all the things bad we've done in this pandemic, our vaccine rollout has been one of the best. And I do think that we just have not the upper hand, but we have the higher moral stance. I think if it was later on in our vaccine rollout and we were looking to vaccinate maybe the under 40s, under 30s, and then the EU asked us to give them some of our vaccine, then they'd maybe have a better moral case. But as it is, we're still vaccinating over 80s, over 70s. These people are still very at risk. And to be honest, we entered into these contracts 3 months before the EU did. So we do have a right to receive these vaccines and then vaccinate our population.
Yeah, well, I guess, Charlotte, then the question has to be, why is the UK's vaccine... Because many people criticise the UK's handling the early parts of the pandemic, but the vaccine programme seems to be going, in anyone's case, well. Why is the UK done so well here when the EU's done, well, obviously not so well?
Part of me thinks it's the fact that the population is so keen to get it. There's some level of anti-vax dialogue, but it's kind of, I think whole communities have kind of rallied round and it's become really encouraging to see kind of everyone so keen to get the vaccine, and because of that, everyone showing up for their vaccine appointments and everything. And there's no kind of, it doesn't seem there's much wastage within the program. It's just, I think everyone's just got behind it, and that's one of the main reasons it's going smoothly. The other thing I think is that we were so quick to take it up. Obviously there was some risk, and we could have done further testing to establish whether the vaccine was truly safe for use or not. But the fact that the UK have kind of diverted every resource from day one to try and get this going, it's given them a real head start on the international community and allowed us to get a really good program going before everyone else has started scrambling for the ultimately limited doses.
You touched upon something there, Charlotte. The idea that we really didn't do enough testing. President Macron came out last week and he said he believed that the AstraZeneca's vaccine was not as effective on people over the age of 55. Many people said this was an anti-vax sentiment, but he said it was something backed up by what these medical people were telling him. Will, I want to go around the panel. Is it safe for major politicians like that to sort of be stoking up be seen as stoking up anti-vax sentiment, especially since right now in the UK, AstraZeneca is being used on people over age of 55? Or is it if Macron's right, is he being taking the correct step, publicly saying that we need to question what's going on? Will, we'll come to you first and we'll go around the panel.
If he wants to say that, he needs to back it up, because you can't afford to introduce doubts over a vaccine that could get us out of this pandemic. If he's got the evidence, then show the evidence. If you've got the evidence, then show that this vaccine is more of a risk to over 65s, over 55s. But if he doesn't, then you're just playing into the hands of anti-vaxxers who have no precedent over normal vaccine policy compared to the scientists who have created these vaccines.
Neil?
Yeah, I agree with Will. I think it's quite irresponsible to be sort of pushing this kind of rhetoric, especially when there are so many other instances of not just politicians, but also figures in media sort of basing or making these baseless claims with very little to none, to no evidence. And even when evidence does come into light that sort of contradicts their positions, I think a lot of these narratives are already set in stone, and sort of we can't really necessarily combat this sort of spread of misinformation, because these initial headlines and stories are what's taken in before any sort of data or evidence is even considered by the people reading them. So yeah, I don't think Macron should be doing things like this.
I think on this matter, it is very dangerous kind of proposing any kind of anti-vax sentiment when he hasn't really presented the evidence for it. Like we kind of saw back in the late 1990s into the early 2000s with the whole MMR vaccine debate, which turned out to be a complete and utter farce. But just the idea of proposing that it could be a risk, it planted a seed in people's head, which created quite a dangerous level of anti-vax sentiment that kind of carried forward throughout the decade. So I think it is very dangerous of Macron in this very crucial time when we're just months away from getting entire populations vaccinated to plant those seeds of doubt, which could hinder the kind of latter stages of the programme and create panic within the nation if they think that potentially the vaccine that they've just been given isn't going to protect them. So it's very damaging, I think, to engage in an anti-vax dialogue debate if there really isn't much evidence that it does create that. And I think I think Macron should really and anyone else that kind of wants to at this point start creating one when there shouldn't be one is doing something that is really isn't acting in the national interest.
Yeah, and Andrew.
I completely agree with what everyone's saying, and I can't really add anything more to it without kind of dragging on the time. I will just say that it's kind of, you have to like understand where people are coming from, because they were told we'll go into lockdown and this will all be over within like a month or two. If not, we'll have something else, like just wear the masks and social distance and, you know, it will all be fine. So I can understand that people are sort of having this viewpoint, even though it's very damaging. And I think it's more about coming from their perspective and going, if we've said this stuff to people and this is how they've reacted, maybe this is something that we could improve on in the future, instead of just trying to say to them, like, shut up, the vaccine works, just like be quiet and take it.
Yeah, well, another issue that sort of arose recently is what I say issue. Who has petitioned the UK government to, rather than vaccinate their entire adult population, once we vaccinate all the vulnerable people, they're asking us to send our vaccines off to other countries that are likely to produce vaccines in order to make sure they can vaccinate all their vulnerable populations. Panel, what do you think? What do you think about this? Do you think this is a good idea? It's all part of our global part of the global community of an obligation to help out these countries, or should we focus on getting our own country vaccinated first? Neil.
I think this is quite a tricky question, because obviously countries like the UK have such a higher capacity to be able to deal with these sort of issues, especially when it comes to the sort of production of vaccines and other things. But then at the same time, disproportionately, I think countries like the UK have also been suffering a great deal more, at least if you look at the current statistics. I think the UK has quite a high death rate. And so I think it's important to sort of put things into perspective in this case. And I think that vaccinating a substantial amount of the population is probably the most important priority to stop the, this insanely high death rate. And then I think we can entertain the idea of distributing vaccines to other countries. However, I don't think it's currently the sort of time to be having this conversation when we still have so much more work to do to combat the issue on a domestic level.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've had more and more good news on the vaccination front. Johnson & Johnson have released their results for their one-shot vaccine, which seems, as from what they've claimed, 100% effective at preventing serious hospitalization and death, and about 6% effective at stopping, serious illness. If not 100% effective at stopping the virus in total. And that's going to UK for approval, hopefully very soon. And so maybe we have more vaccines coming on the horizon. So hope, there is hope at the end of the tunnel. There's light at the end of the tunnel, everyone. But yeah, I think we had a very good conversation about the vaccines, but I want to move on to something hopefully slightly more fun. Game stonks. You may have all seen the great debacle on Wall Street as a bunch of Redditors against sink a hedge fund. Neil, I want to come to you. Explain what's going on with GameStop.
So basically, initially, I'm sure everyone's familiar with the subreddit Wall Street Bets. And they've grown quite popular as of late. And initially, it was noticed about a year ago that the hedge fund, specifically the hedge fund Melvin Capital and a bunch of others, had an extremely high short position on GameStop. And what that essentially means is that they had borrowed shares from other companies and then sold them, expecting the price to go down. And then they would buy those shares back at a much lower price and then make money off of the difference at which they sold the price bought and sold the shares. And so what people realized was that the size of the short positions from these big hedge funds was above the amount of actual shares that existed in the market for GameStop. And what they were essentially doing was sort of putting a downwards pressure on GameStop. And this kind of started this whole argument of whether should funds be allowed to sort of in some way manipulate the price downwards with these massive short positions. And when people started to find out about this, they began to pump GameStop and encourage others to buy shares, forcing the shorts to rebuy those shares at a much higher price, therefore making these funds incur massive losses. And I think most recently, the fund Melvin Capital has posted about a 53% loss in the month of January alone. So yeah, it's sort of started out as a meme on the subreddit, and I think it's kind of it's kind of spiraled out of control with big media outlets reporting in on it and massive amounts of new investors coming into the market and sort of also trying to drive up GameStop, and not necessarily only GameStop, but a lot of other stocks as well. So it'll be interesting to see when this supposed short squeeze actually happens, because many people have said that, you know, these big hedge funds haven't necessarily closed their positions at all yet. And whether this will have any sort of lasting implications on what kinds of short selling or institutional power is allowed within a supposedly free and fair market.
Yeah. Now, Andrew, you're the personal Margot Robbie of this stream. So please explain to us what shorts are.
All right. So there's probably going to be a few people watching this who don't really know much. They know that companies have like shares, stocks, and people trade them. And I'd like to preface this by saying I'm not like a financial professional. Don't take any of my advice like as something serious or like trading advice. And yeah, just do your due diligence and be smart like about your money. So a short, I had like a sort of interesting way to explain it. You're buying a pop ticket, it's week 5, you know, you're in the middle of term, you're stressed out, you just want to go to pop with your mates. You get your pop ticket for £5 or whatever it was last year. And you've got your pop ticket and you're like, right, finally, I'm going to go, I'm going to have some fun. And then someone comes up to you and they're like, I tell you what, you give me your pop ticket and I'll give it back to you just before you get into pop, and I'll give you like £1 or £2 on top of it. And you're like, yeah, all right, that sounds fair enough. I just lend you my pop ticket and then I get it back with money. And what this person then does is they immediately sell that pop ticket to whoever wants to buy it for, I don't know, £5. But the reason they're selling it immediately is maybe they've heard that this pop is going to be really terrible, no one's going to go, and the tickets are going to go down in price. So they've taken your pop ticket and sold it. So now they owe you a pop ticket. But they can then buy one in the future at a lower price than what they sold it for. So in a few days, there's like rumors going about, oh, pop's going to suck, like no one's going. People start selling all their tickets. Supply and demand, everyone's selling their tickets and the price decreases. And then the person just buys your pop ticket back for, I don't know, £1 or £2, gives it back to you, gives you your £1. You're happy because you've got your ticket back and £1 or £2 extra. They're happy because they made a profit on that kind of price difference. Now, the problem with this is, say people start a rumor, or I shouldn't be starting a rumor. There's information that gets out that this is going to be the best pop ever. It's going to be Disco Dave, like at his best. You can't miss this. And they've already borrowed your ticket and sold it, but now the price of the ticket is slowly going up and up and up. And now it's £10, £20, £30. People want these pop tickets. Now, the person who's borrowed off you and sold it, they have to give you that pop ticket back, because otherwise you're going to be pissed off that you can't get in. And that's basically what's happening here. These companies took shares of GameStop, sold them immediately, and because they were selling them immediately, this caused the price to go down further. It's like the squeeze. But then they have to buy the shares back, and they're thinking, well, GameStop's going to die, like no one's really going in there anymore, brick and mortar store, yada, yada, yada. We can get the shares back cheaper, or we don't even have to pay at all if the company goes bankrupt. And then there's one guy called Deep Effing Value, or Roaring Kitty on YouTube, and he noticed this, I think, in August of last year. And he was like, wait a second, if I buy these shares now, I decide the price that these companies have to buy them back at. I could sell this share back at whatever price I dictate, basically. So then people on this subreddit, Wall Street Bets, were like, hey, if we all buy these shares in a few like weeks, months, whatever, when the companies that sold them have to buy them back to give them to like the person who lent them, they're going to have to pay like through the nose to get them back. And this is like a massive panic for hedge funds because, well, I'm sure as people have heard, they had to be bailed out with literally billions of dollars. And yeah, I'll just wrap it up because I've been rambling. My advice is, if you're thinking of buying and you're new to this kind of stuff, just sit it out. Like, the train's left the station. You're probably going to lose all your money because it can crash any day.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. Charlotte, I want to come to you. I want to ask, having heard his explanation of what's going on, do you think this is a good thing? This is a bad thing? This is the people sticking it to the man and the Wall Street companies, or do you think this is people being taken for a ride by a bunch of overzealous investors?
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's just a really new and unique form of protest. Sorry. And it's left some people who got in the right time and have since bought out. It's left them with a lot more money than they started off with. So I think that's really good because it's a difficult time for everyone, this pandemic. So a few ordinary people walk away with some more money in the bank, then that's absolutely brilliant. I myself I'm not an investor and I haven't jumped on the bandwagon, but I kind of wish I had invested at the right time and then sold later on. But I think the sad thing of all of this is that Wall Street will inevitably win in the end. Like, we've already seen them kind of flexing their muscles and getting Robin Hood to trading for a while. And so my worry is a few people that jumped on this at the start and have got quite and stood to make a lot of money from it are ultimately in the end going to end up losing it, because GameStop, as much as it's glorious that it went up so much, and it's really shown the Wall Street banks that they don't have they're not all powerful. They will win in the end, and it will leave people off worse off than they started. So that's kind of the sad reality, because the momentum can't last forever.
Yeah. And Will, would you agree?
I mean, I'm not really an expert on it. I've basically just been learning what's been going on for the last week, but I do think that a ticking time bomb has been introduced now, and it's just whoever's left holding it when it explodes will get financially ruined, and that could potentially be new investors who have jumped on the bandwagon, who have seen the gains that people have made, but could be left really, really short-handed once the stock inevitably crashes back down to its actual value, as opposed to the value inflated by Wall Street bets.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Charlotte, you touched upon it, of course. There's an issue with the Robinhood app, which sort of powered most of the early investing in GameStop. It was an app that let retail investors invest without need to make a commission payment. It's now suspended trading on GameStop and other meme stocks like AMC, which is a fair chain in America. Reasons why it's suspended gaming are very sort of unclear as of yet. Some people say it's because they were pressured by Wall Street. Others say that they simply lacked the capital to sustain what was going on with market volatility. Neil, I want to come to you. Do you think the fact that Robinhood, which promised to be the future of trading, bringing trading to people, has suspended trading on GameStop, is a bad sign for Wall Street, not just for Wall Street, but for the stock market in general?
So I think you touched on this earlier when you said that there are multiple reasons for why they sort of halted trading on these specific tickers. And I think it's important to know that there are legitimate reasons for doing so. And I think it's very easy for people to get mad. And there's rightful anger at Wall Street. I understand that. But there are legitimate issues with how these brokerage apps work when you have such unprecedented levels of volume of people rushing to buy these stocks who have never invested before, throwing in all their money into GameStop, AMC and such. These brokerages will have issues, like you said, with fronting the capital. And I think it's, with regards to Robinhood, their marketing is very, very terrible, unfortunately. They do market themselves as this, free trading platform. And the response from the CEO, especially, I think he was on CNBC the other day, where he was saying, no, we don't have any liquidity issues. This is just, we're trying to protect the investors. And I think there is this idea that retail investors do know what they're doing, and they're sick of, the big firms on Wall Street or the brokerages treating them as if they are expected to lose money. And I will add that I think there is a very important aspect of this whole situation, which is the messaging coming from these institutions and these brokerages. So there's a stark contrast between how Robinhood and Webull, which is another very large brokerage, sort of handled the situation. And I think the Webull CEO came out and sort of gave a line-by-line explanation as to why they couldn't, back these trades. And I think that did some kind of movement against the sort of rage against these big brokerages. And people assume that it's because they're sort of in bed with Wall Street. And I feel like these, it's wasting a lot of potential anger at Wall Street for more legitimate issues if people tend to get more hung up on issues that necessarily aren't as what they think is the reality. And I think a lot of people got stuck in this narrative of, these brokerages are against the small retail traders. And while I can agree with the sentiment, I don't think this is necessarily the case in this in this instance. Yeah, I hate to be a contrarian, but I truly believe this is actually what happened.
I don't hate it when people are contrarian. I love contrarians on this show. It's sort of the only thing that keeps the show going. We're gonna have to start wrapping this conversation up soon, but one last thing we want to touch on. Joe Biden, I can't go a single show without mentioning Joe Biden anymore. Joe Biden, his administration was asked about questions about the GameStop situation and the Robinhood situation, and then he refused to comment on it. Do you think this is obviously, if Donald Trump was around, he definitely would have commented on it by now. Do you think it's a good sign for the new era that the President of the United States has stayed out of this conversation so far? And let's go around the panel again. I'll start with you, Will.
I probably do think he should have address the situation, but I can understand why he didn't, because at the moment everyone is angry at what Robinhood have done, at what the hedge funds are doing, because right wingers want a free market, they want no intervention, and then left wingers want intervention, but intervention to help the poorest in society. But what we're seeing is intervention to help the richest in society. So I can sort of understand why Joe Biden didn't want to enhance that further by intervening on behalf of the Wall Street bank or Wall Street hedge funds at the moment.
Yeah. Neil?
I think because the dust hasn't necessarily settled on this issue yet, I think it's a good thing that Biden hasn't necessarily commented on it, because there are so many different narratives that are prevailing at the moment. And once we can fully understand what exactly has happened, then I think it's a good idea for these sort of bigger politicians to get in on it and then propose potential changes once we sort of figure out what exactly has happened here that's wrong, because I see a lot of anger towards this issue, but not necessarily a good consensus on what exactly is the issue here. So I think there are conversations to be had about how much you can short a company or what kind of pressure these big firms can put on retail investors and sort of dying stocks. But I think it's important that we have all the facts before we make any sort of, claims.
Yeah. Charlotte?
I think in a way, Joe Biden has made a good decision by not necessarily coming out and making too much of a statement on this, because I think it becomes clear if you look at stock markets, a president or any political figure, I happen to see in the UK as well, if what they say or do can really, even if it's just a speech at a private event, that have an impact on the stock market. You see at kind of the party conferences here in the UK, the leader's speech of the Prime Minister has in the past had an impact on the way stock markets go. And so Joe Biden making what could seem like a very innocent speech about the whole matter could in theory destroy people's livelihoods, whether that be just your casual investors that have gotten on this from or it could really impact the hedge funds, which I think some people forget that there are people's pensions in these, and so in these hedge funds. So I think Joe Biden has made a good decision by not weighing in on this, really, because there is a lot at stake for a lot of people here, and it's fair for a president to use their power to influence the stock market to necessarily go one way or another when he obviously doesn't know all the facts about the matter, and it's a very kind of sensitive topic to tread, because there's people's financial and personal livelihoods at stake here, if something, depending on what goes either way.
Yeah. And last but never least, Andrew.
Yeah, I completely agree with everyone that it's better to not say anything than to say something and sort of offend, not even offend, just destroy people's livelihoods. And I'll say one last thing, that if you want to have like a more broken down explanation of this, there's a guy on YouTube called Lewis Rossman, and he's basically been posting videos every day, like going through it in quite good like beginner detail if you want to get like a better understanding of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I didn't quite catch her name, but we'll talk about that a bit afterwards. But we will, moving swiftly on from GameStop to our last story of today, we are going to discuss the SU democracy and the all-student vote taking place this week. Not the actual motions, not allowed to discuss the motions, but if you want to know what the motions are, the motions this year in this year's all-student vote, where voting opens at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, it's the motion asks us to support the rent strike, a motion asking the SU to stop the building construction of the A46, the motion asking the SU to support a more comprehensive safety net, a motion asking the SU to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, a motion asking the SU to find a permanent liberation space in the SU HQ, a motion asking to support sex workers, student sex workers, a motion asking to support have a review into sexual violence resource availability, and we're trying to make sure they publicize all information they have about sexual violence on the SU Facebook page and welcoming materials, an increased module feedback for students motion, and also a sexual violence prevention training motion, which made that mandatory for all students. That's 9 motions, which is a lot. Normally, you only get about 4. I remember my first time doing this, we only had 2, which was a relief, rather than having to list off 9 topics in one go. Panel, obviously, we can't discuss the motions, but I think the fact that there are more motions than ever sort of points to the fact that there's a wider engagement in SU democracy this term. Do you think?
I'll go.
Yeah. Well.
Obviously, it's my first year here, so I can't really say what it was like before, but it does seem to be that student democracy is developing a bit more, because obviously in the first time we only had I think it was 4 or 5 motions, and I think that can only be good, especially if people do get involved in voting for all of them, and if the message gets out there that they need to be voted for, then more and more people will become engaged.
Well, yeah. Well, as a first year, how engaged do you feel to your student democracy?
I think there's been a few issues this year that have been more prevalent than ever. So like the sexual violence thing, sort of the hashtag shame on you Warwick protests. And you can see that registered in some of the motions. I think there's 2 or 3 motions regarding preventing sexual violence or increasing awareness for resources people can use. And I think there's other motions that have just developed normally from that would have been around in any other year. And I think that, there's no such thing as bad democracy, especially if everyone gets to say on the issues at hand.
Yeah, I want to open up to the panel at large, because I've been having a discussion with people at all-student vote all day today. Lots of them didn't actually realize it was this week, and it wasn't just me who forgot what week it is. Andrew, I'll come to you on this. What do you think the SU does enough to publicize their democracy?
To be completely honest, I wasn't aware it was this week either, and I think it was through something you posted on Facebook that I was like, oh, it's this week. And it's just the fact that they send these emails that contain so much just conflicting information. I think it should be more here is a vote, you are a student, you have a vote, you should use it. And I don't know, 9 motions or whatever, is that a good thing that there's more, or is it trying to sort of slip stuff through that might get unnoticed? I don't know. I can't really say. I don't do politics or anything, but people should be made more aware of it, and just a direct email, vote, tell your friends to vote, because these issues they shouldn't be getting solved by the most vocal people who are sort of dictating if it's going to be a yes or a no, or don't carry, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask someone who was very heavily involved in SU democracy last year. Charlotte, have you noticed, compared to your campaign last year, have you noticed a different tenor in SU politics this year then? More people getting engaged?
Yeah, I've definitely noticed increased engagement, but I think very little of that engagement has been people who are actually positive about the SU. I think there's been various actions by certain SAB officers this year that have really kind of raised the level of hatred, I guess, towards the SU in many ways. But for most people, it's just a level of distrust and thinking that it's an unaccountable body. I think looking at the engagement with last term's all-student vote, particularly on the motion about online teaching, which was overwhelmingly rejected by the student body. Yet the SAB officers tried everything in their power to kind of get this statement across that the student body preferred online teaching. They wanted to have less in-person teaching. Yet obviously, if you just look at the results, you know that simply wasn't the case. So I think there has been the democratic deficit within the issue has become really apparent this year. Like my campaign in the spring elections last year, I guess I was trying to get that idea a little bit, but I just don't think there was the appetite. But I think coronavirus has kind of really mobilised the student body against Warwick SU, and I think they've got a lot of work to do to try and persuade the student body again that they are actually representative of their interests. Because if you look at all the motions that have been submitted in this all-student, I mean, if you look at the proposals and seconders on a lot of them, you'll see that a lot of them are actually sitting SU officers who are trying to just get their own policy through. And because fortunately the SU have measures in place to ensure that officers can't do whatever they want. It has to have some democratic accountability after their election. So I honestly, I haven't considered each and every motion, but I think if you actually look at the details of a lot of them, you'll see that it's not necessarily in as good faith as the title suggests.
Yeah, but surely then the SU officers have to pass their policies through an all-student vote, as we're seeing now. That proves there is a sort of democratic accountability.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. But it's the fact that in a lot of these occasions, the relevant officers tried to get their things through without that democratic accountability. So, like we kind of see various SABs posting these posts in all the freshers groups about their opinion on certain things and what they think should happen, and yet you get this kind of really like, for instance, the idea of introducing slates in the upcoming SU elections. There was no democratic accountability about that. It didn't go to ASV. To the best of my knowledge, there wasn't a vote on it in student council or in any of the democracy committees. It was merely the DDO flagging through something that they felt was right, and the reaction to it has been almost universally negative. So it clearly isn't what the student body are crying out for. So though I think that yes, it's good that certain decisions have now been forced to go to a vote to see what students think, but there is still many mechanisms in place within the SU that allow SABs to put through things with only a few handful of politically engaged students actually knowing about. So I think that's just mine.
Yeah, surely they have to be allowed to make decisions. There's no point electing them if they can't make any decisions.
Well, I think with the idea of slates, I think the full-time officer roles within the SU, they're well-paid jobs. Like, and it's undeniable that slates are going to make it easier for certain candidates to get elected. Those candidates may have a political alliance with the individual in question who's actually flagged this decision through. So this whole idea of introducing slates, it just screams to me of making it easier for existing SABs to get jobs for the boys. And I think when you're looking at kind of 20k a year plus jobs, and there has to be some democratic accountability about how these people are getting elected, because that is a lot of money. It's all student money. When we buy our pub tickets, when we go and get a drink in Terrace Bar, that's paying for the wages of these students. Their elections have to be accountable, and the election process shouldn't be meddled with by single individuals.
Well, I guess then, Charlotte, will you be running on a slate this year?
No, my plan is to run independently.
Oh, very interesting. I'll have to keep an eye out for that. Okay, as final question before we end today's stream. Will people here in this call be voting in this all-student vote election? Don't tell me what you're going to vote for. Just tell me if you're going to be voting in general. Will you be voting?
Yeah, I'll be voting, and I'll be trying to get the message out. I'll put it in like all my WhatsApp group chats and things like that. Yeah, because obviously it's important to let people know.
Neil, you be voting?
To be honest, I didn't even know it was a thing until today, but I probably will be now.
Yeah, Charlotte, I guess you'll be voting.
Yeah, I'll make up my mind up on each individual one, but there's quite a few that I'll probably be abstaining on.
Yeah, and Andrew, I hope you'll be voting since you're an elected official.
Yeah, I'll have a skim through, and then the ones I think I have like enough understanding of, I'll vote, and then the others I can abstain.
Yeah. Well, if these gang of cool cats are going to vote, you should vote too. God, oh God, that was awful. That was okay. That's the moment that broke me. Oh, I'm going to end the stream now. Yeah. Well, voting opens at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Please find. There's a meeting tonight at 5 p.m. Go along, find out more, learn a bit more, get engaged. Please do vote. It does have some effect on your life. But until then, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my panel for coming on. You're absolutely wonderful. I'll see you all next week. It's been a wonderful broadcast. Goodbye.